tells us that we shall not oppress a stranger.
We see civilization breaking down, rioting taking place, excitement everywhere. Race riots, class, war, government doesn't get along, people don't get along, families breaking down, can't get along. Is there a correlation to all this stuff? What's going on? What an interesting time and period we live in. Are these people just getting upset and protesting in the name of a African American that was wrongfully shot by a police officer? If that's the case, then why are they burning down stores and places? Why are they burning down churches? The church of the African American person was burned down. Why would these people do things like that if they cared so much? And it's all in the name of justice. What an interesting time we live in. Will this chaos here hit your streets soon? Will it hit the streets of Seattle? I forecast it will be in the streets of Seattle by 2016. Hello, welcome everybody. This is the December monthly report for NoSpinNewsSource.com 2014 edition. Thank you so much for joining once again. It's the last studio edition for the year, and then it will be 2015. How exciting. So today, well, we're going to discuss what would be the elections here of 2014 for November. First of all, well, let's discuss the fact that the Republicans won the election. First of all, so what does this signify? This means that what would be Barack Obama is obviously losing a lot of steam. Even folks from his own party, the Democrats, are now what would be distancing themselves as much as they possibly can. And you hardly ever hear anybody, including the Democrats, even want to use the name President Obama any longer. So sometimes it's not just what they say, sometimes it's what they don't say that speaks volumes and even more than what they don't say. So, long story short, the Republicans did have a sweeping defeat regarding Senate and whatnot. So now it's going to be both sides of the House will be what would be the GOP. But will this make any real difference? That's a question. Will there be any slowdown of the war? Ron Paul surely doesn't think so. He thinks it's going to escalate, as a matter of fact. Also, what does this mean for a lot of factors? Will impeachment now go through? Or will it not? Will the Republicans be opportunistic, sit back and let Obama make them look good in the meanwhile, thinking that's going to help them for 2016? Who knows? But if they ride that wave out, that only lasts for so long, and it's going to end up making them look bad in the long run as well. So, let's go on to some news articles, shall we? What would be drones over the United States gets okayed by what would be the House. White House taunts GOP on climate change, stating, quote, "I don't believe they can stop us," unquote. Net neutrality and reclassification makes American broadband consumers the real losers. That's right. Retired general calls for the U.S. Army on the streets of the United States in order to restore civil order. Now that goes clearly against what would be our Constitution regarding posse comitatus. But some folks have seemed to forget and have gone astray, from military to legislation to whatever. Folks in our society even don't seem to know the difference between the Constitution and really what the rule of law really is. So ultimately, Senator Schumer says that Obama hurt the Democrats and stated, quote, 85% of all Americans were fine with their health care, unquote. Brown family calls for riots. The church, there was a church burnt, and the stepfather of what would be Mr. Brown, who was shot by the Caucasian police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, yelled, quote, to, quote, "burn this bitch down," unquote. So he was what would be inciting riots at the scene in Ferguson, Missouri, after what would be the court decision regarding Michael Brown. Now, we have a bunch of videos to discuss, along with what will be discussion titles, factors, and whatnot. But for right now, let's go to this video right now regarding President Obama. He's getting so desperate, he's now starting to quote what would be the scriptures of the Holy Bible in order to explain his reasoning and regarding how he intends or did intend to legalize these illegal immigrants, which he just did a few days ago. We'll catch you right back after this break.
Are we a nation that kicks out a striving, hopeful immigrant like Astrid? Or are we a nation that finds a way to welcome her in? Scripture tells us that we shall not oppress a stranger, for we know the heart of a stranger.
And you know Obama cares about what the scriptures state, of course. He's a Christian.
We were strangers once too. My fellow Americans, we are and always will be a nation of immigrants.
Joining me now, Jonathan Turley, constitutional attorney and professor at George Washington University. Good to see you again, Professor. And so you have spoken out about this through President Bush's years and now through President Obama's years, and talked about the rise of an Uber presidency. Is the president, in your view, about to violate the separation of powers if he goes ahead and does this?
Well, Megan, we're waiting for the details, but what I'm hearing certainly causes great concern that he will again violate separation of powers. The Supreme Court has already ruled that this president has violated the separation of powers. It just took another case a week ago in the ACA Obamacare area about whether he had another violation in that area. And this certainly raises the same profile. The president's expressing frustration that Congress is not doing what he thinks Congress has to do. But of course, he's a different branch, and we have three branches in this system. And no president can take on the powers of all three branches, and that's what he seems to be doing. He certainly seems to be taking on legislative authority. He hasn't been particularly coy about this. You know, he says, this is what I wanted to get out of legislation, and I'm going to do it on my own. And that does become a government of one.
Right. I mean, he had control. The Democrats did, of the House and the Senate. He didn't prioritize this. He didn't push for it. And when the Democrats lost the House, years after, he decided to push for it, and he couldn't get it through. It's not like he's never believed that this is within Congress's authority. He tried. Congress said no. And who are these congressmen? Not just some random people who, I don't know how they wound up in Washington. They're the people's representatives. They get a vote. Their vote was no. And now he's just so irritated, he said, well, too bad. I'm going to do it on my own. How can that be? How can that be allowed?
Well, it's a very sad moment, but it's becoming a particularly dangerous moment if the president is going to go forward, particularly after this election, to defy the will of Congress yet again. I can understand the frustration. These are obviously two parties that are not getting along. But as you said, we do have a democratic process. We have a Congress that is coming in with the full voice of the American people behind them. That's what an election is. Now, you may disagree with the outcome, but you have to respect the outcome. Mm-hmm. What the president is suggesting is tearing at the very fabric of the Constitution. We have a separation of powers that gives us balance. And that doesn't protect the branches. It's not there to protect the executive branch or legislative branch. It's to protect liberty. It's to keep any branch from assuming so much control that they become a threat to liberty.
Right.
And I'm afraid that's... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
This isn't about how you feel about what should be done about the 11 million illegal immigrants living in this country. You can very much want a path to legalization for them. You could be behind the president's, original plan submitted to Congress that was passed by the Senate. What this is about is what a president gets to do when an elected branch says no to his agenda. And the framers decided that a long time ago.
Well, I think that's right. And I think what I tell a lot of my friends on the Democratic side, is that we will rue the day that you helped create this Uber presidency. It's been developing a long time, but is reaching a very dangerous point. This will not be our last president. And you may not agree with the next one. But what the Democrats are creating is something very, very dangerous. They're creating a president who can go it alone. And to go it alone is something that is the very danger that the framers sought to avoid in our Constitution.
Yeah, I said last night to Charles Krauthammer, how will they like it if they get a Republican president in there who says, you know what, I don't like these laws that prevent protests outside of abortion clinics, so I'm just going to use my discretion not to pursue any prosecutions against those people. And if protests against abortion clinics grow so loud and so big that nobody can go into these clinics and get an abortion, well, so be it, because that's a matter of my discretion. I mean, you have to be very careful what you wish for when empowering the executive. I want to ask you one other thing, which is, what should Republicans, or Democrats for that matter, who object to what he is likely about to do in response?
Well, it does sound like Congress is going to aggressively assert its authority through legislation and other means. What Congress and what the American people have to insist on from this president is a limiting principle. What the president is saying lacks a limiting principle. He's basically saying, if these reports are correct, that he can claim discretion to simply not enforce a federal law. Well, that comes very close, if doesn't cross the line, of legislation. If a president can do that, as you've said, they can do that with environmental laws or anti-discrimination laws. The American people have got to force this issue and say, look, we may agree with you on what you're trying to do, but we don't agree how you're trying to do it.
Right? That's not the point, the agreement on the underlying principle. And so if he goes ahead and does it, I mean, obviously the next president could undo it. That might cause all sorts of logistical problems. But I mean, right now, Senator Jeff Sessions, who's going to take over as the Budget Committee chief, says, I'm going to try to deny the funding. I'm going to try to sort of take away his ability to issue temporary worker cards to anybody. But there have been some questions about whether that could work. There's a lawsuit already pending against him. There's a question about whether that is feckless. Some people have talked about impeaching the president. The Republicans seem to feel that's too politically dangerous. So as a practical matter, is he just probably going to get away with it?
Well, I hope that he does not get away with it if what we're talking about is a circumvention of the separation of powers, because that is the very thumping heart of our constitutional system. As for what Congress can do, they have to use every resource available. You know, the president has made a mockery of the power of the purse. You can't just rely on that. It's like running a nuclear reactor with an on-off switch. It doesn't really do what people think it does. It's very hard to use appropriations to control a president who is engaging in overreach. But you have a great array of options, and the Congress appears to be exploring that. I think impeachment is the one that I would caution people not to look to in favor of some of these other options.
Yeah.
You know, I testified in the Clinton impeachment. I represented the last judge impeached. It's not a road you want to go down unless there's any other option.
I'm almost out of time. I've got to get this in quickly. To those who say many presidents have issued executive orders on immigration, none this sweeping, none near this sweeping, what say you?
Oh, this would be unprecedented, and I think it would be an unprecedented threat to the balance of powers within our system.
Jonathan Turley, great to see you, sir.
Thank you, Megan.
All the best, Professor.
And welcome back to the show. Now, U.S. Defense Secretary Hagel resigns over apparent disagreements within the White House. Quote, middle class would go to jail for what big corporations are allowed to do, unquote, said an independent journalist by the name of Charlie McGrath on the RT show recently. Senator Coburn stated, quote, you could see instances of anarchy, you could see violence, armed patriots headed to the White House to arrest Obama. That was a quote of his regarding the amnesty factor. Well, amnesty went through, so we'll see what happens or doesn't happen now. Anyway, Tennessee moves to sue Obama over amnesty. Nashville, November 21st, 2014, on Friday, in response to President Obama's plan, which is now action, to take executive action on illegal immigration reform. Two Tennessee legislators are filing what would be a joint resolution requesting Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam, which is a Republican, requesting him to file a lawsuit against what would be the Obama administration on behalf of the state. Quote, Article 2 of the United States Constitution is explicitly clear on the powers vested within the executive branch. President Obama lacks the authority to execute even the slightest change in policy. The Constitution delegates President Obama the power to make suggestions concerning policy and nothing more. Unquote. Said State Representative Andy Holt. Thursday night, after President Obama delivered a primetime speech announcing his plan of action, quote, anything beyond making suggestions is an illegal usurpation of undelegated power, and we simply cannot allow it to go unchecked, unquote. Now, Boehner, Speaker of the House, stated, quote, something will be done. The president has turned a deaf ear to the American people that was elected. We were elected to serve, but we will not do that. Let's check out what would be Old Tears himself, as I call him, Speaker of the House, John Boehner. Remember, he was just playing with golf with President Obama a few months ago, and now he's saying something will be done. I doubt it will be impeachment. We'll catch you back after this break.
The president has taken actions that he himself has said are those of a king or an emperor, not an American president. And he's doing this at a time when Americans want nothing more than both parties to focus on solving the biggest problems in our country, starting with our still struggling economy. And the action by the president yesterday will only encourage more people to come here illegally and putting their lives at risk. We saw the humanitarian crisis of our border last summer, how horrific it was. Well, next summer, it could be worse. And this action also punishes those who've obeyed the law and have waited their turn. With this action, the president has chosen to deliberately sabotage any chance of enacting bipartisan reforms that he claims to seek. And as I told the president yesterday, he's damaging the presidency itself. President Obama has turned a deaf ear to the people that he was elected and we were elected to serve. But we will not do that. In the days ahead, the People's House will rise to this challenge. We will not stand idle as the president undermines the rule of law in our country and places lives at risk. We'll listen to the American people, we'll work with our members, and we will work to protect the Constitution of the United States.
And welcome back to the December monthly report for 2014. I'm Kari, Ilonummi, your host once again. Thank you so much. And now the question is, I ask you, the viewer, what will be done? Will it be lip service? Will it be more playing golf at some lavish resort? Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and what would be the president? Or will it be real action, such as what would be impeachment? And my question is, how far will we allow this president? How far will our government allow this president to go without impeaching him? We have a situation here, for instance, where I'm in the state of Washington. We have some decent, what would be state representatives, but none of them, including the Republicans, will openly, publicly go out on a whim on Facebook or anywhere else and call for the impeachment of this president. Behind closed doors, some of these folks will sit back and have a cocktail and tell folks like me they agree with me, they believe with what I'm saying, this and that, but they dare not go public and say it. And this is interesting. You know, I remember several years ago, everybody got after the Lyndon LaRouche youth movement of LaRouchePack.com because they had those Hitler mustache, what would be, on the president. Now, this is interesting because, and we're going to bring up this picture right now for those of you who have not had a chance to see the LaRouche Hitler sign of the past. So you could get a picture of what we're talking about here. But anyway, long story short, Mr. LaRouche and his company, his crew, what would be, posted, and they had signs of what would be our president, Barack Obama, with the Hitler mustache on his face. Now, why is this? It was considered very offensive, disgusting by many, so on and so forth. But why was this? Why is this happening? Why is this going on? Well, there's reasoning for that. And as we see several years later, apparently LaRouche Pack was right. Because, well, he is acting like a dictator. He is acting like Hitler. So several years later, even the GOP is agreeing with us, but they dare not go on a whim and whatnot and state it publicly. Nobody, seems like hardly anybody, wants to talk about impeachment. And that is very unfortunate. So we're going to talk about now Julian Assange of WikiLeaks.com. What would be the extradition order has been upheld by the Swedish Court of Appeals, and now we're beginning to see folks such as Snowden, Assange, any of the big people and names in media, so on and so forth. These people are being tossed under the bus hardcore. These people are being murdered off, set up. Weird cases are happening. I mean, we got folks like from Breitbart Media, the one guy that contributed to that had the car that blew up and his engine flew like 100 feet down the road in the opposite direction he was traveling in. Weird stuff going on out there in the world these days. So let's check out what will be this video regarding WikiLeaks, and there are new WikiLeaks to come out. So in the long run, the governments and the folks oppressing these people around the world are forcing people to step to the plate and release the information that can be considered rather damning to many governments, including the Barack Obama administration. So we'll check you right back after this break. Thank you so much.
Bad news for Julian Assange this afternoon. A Swedish appeal court upheld the arrest warrant for the WikiLeaks founder over alleged sex crimes. It means, therefore, he's staying holed up for the time being, at least, at Ecuador's embassy in Britain, from where Laura Smith reports now.
This is not good news for Julian Assange here inside the Ecuadorian embassy. He's been holed up here for more than 2 years so far, and it doesn't look like he's going to be going anywhere soon. What today's decision means is that the Court of Appeal in Sweden has rejected his appeal. It will uphold the arrest warrant that Sweden has issued for him. The Swedish government still refuses to guarantee that he won't be extradited onto the US from there. Of course, that's the thing that Julian Assange and his team most fear. There is word that there's a criminal investigation into his activities with WikiLeaks underway in the US, and he fears for his safety. The Swedish prosecutor has always maintained that she won't come to London to question Julian Assange, despite the fact that he's issued repeated invitations and provided a location, he says, for her to come and question him. She wants him to go to Sweden, and she's given no real explanation for why. The other factor in this case that's of particular concern to the British taxpayer is this policeman that you can probably see behind me. The embassy here requires 24-hour policing in order to stop Julian Assange from leaving and arrest him if he tries, and that operation is costing the British taxpayer millions of pounds.
Yeah, Laura Smith in London there. Well, let's put a figure on it, talking of how much it is all costing. This is how much British taxpayers are shelling out to ensure Julian Assange doesn't get away. Let's see. It's no small change, as we're about to reveal. It's nigh on... well, it's that much, £7.9 million, nigh on £10 million been spent over the last 2 years, that is, that figure, for police officers to keep an eye out and prevent Assange from slipping through their fingers. That means, therefore, if you do the math, some £13,500 are being spent every day. London's Mayor Boris Johnson called the cost ridiculous and a complete waste.
And welcome back to the Monthly Report Show, ladies and gentlemen, here at NoSpinNewsSource.com. So moving onward with what will be some of these articles, Senator, what would be Bernie Sanders, is aligned with the Democrats, but he has spoken lately of a problem with the Democratic coalition that elected President Obama. He says working class white voters have abandoned Democrats in large numbers. The party, he says, quote, has not made it clear they are prepared to stand with the working class people of this country. Take on the big money interest, unquote. That's what Bernie Sanders stated. CIA wants to delete thousands of emails as Obama administration stalls release of torture reports. Stuart Rhodes of OathKeepers.com. Obama must be impeached and removed to stop his, quote, amnesty, unquote, of illegals. Obama extends deportation reprieve to 5 million undocumented immigrants as of last week. Passing the Keystone Pipeline is, quote, an act of war, unquote, according to the Sioux Tribe president, telling RT. As we just talked about a moment ago regarding Assange and the Swedish Court of Appeals, this is very interesting that his extradition is being upheld and the circumstances are moving forward as it is. It seems like a pretty flimsy case of what would be supposed sexual assault that's being pended against him. But we'll have to go through, I guess, in the future and see the evidence step by step, allowing everyone to have their day in court and to be considered innocent until proven guilty. Rapper is charged under newly enforced California law, faces law in prison for gang-related song lyrics. That's right. So freedom of speech, well, that only applies if you don't offend people, I suppose. Buffalo police to enforce seizing firearms of deceased owners. That's right. So we are seeing step by step Second Amendment rights are dwindling away, and they're going to continue to erode away. New York, what would be woman on Ebola watch list, dies bleeding from her mouth at a what would be shop to have her hair done. And authorities said, quote, heart attack was the cause of death. So she's bleeding out all of her orifices. She just came back from Western Africa. She's displaying the symptoms of what would be Ebola, heart, but it becomes all of a sudden a heart attack. How convenient. Sounds like a cover-up, potentially, allegedly, to me. Now, what would be? We started out the beginning of the show showing a little action there. We also show you hearing Obama tell you different factors and things for himself. Very interesting, very exciting. Now, many of you may have heard and many of you may have not, but there is a man by the name of Gruber. Mr. Gruber helped design. He was one of the chief architects of what we now know today as Obamacare legislation. Mr. Gruber, according to Nancy Pelosi and the president himself, didn't have much to do or little to do with what would be Obamacare. But when we go back a little deeper in time, we see Obama for himself admit that he stole information. He said stole what would be gleaned from what would be Mr. Gruber, and that this man was a key architect of just this. So key architect, Mr. Gruber himself, acknowledges that it was, quote, the stupidity of the American voter, unquote. That was absolutely needed and fundamental to pass this bill. So, I'll allow what would be the man that Obama has looked up to as a guru for this signature legislation of his that he looks up to so much, and we will find out just how smart or stupid the American voter has really been and how you feel about that, knowing now, once you see this video, that most of you were played for the fools in which you are regarding Obama, thinking he was such a wonderful president. How many of you out there voted for Obama? Dismiss, turn your back to conspiracy theorists like myself or other folks out there, fringe, as you labeled us, such as Alex Jones or Lyndon LaRouche or whomever, just to find out several years later, well, guess what? We're still right. We haven't fizzled out of politics yet. We're still very credible and only beginning to build momentum, as everybody else out there that did the laughing and scoffing and ignored and talked stuff behind our backs, well, now you are being discredited. How you like that? So let's see what Gruber has to say, and let's find out how stupid or smart you were for voting for Barack Obama.
It's just, you can't do it politically. You just literally cannot do it. Okay, transparent financing, unless I have transparent financing, also transparent spending. I mean, this bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. If CBO scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies. Okay, so it's written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay, just like the people, lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to getting the thing to pass. And, it's the second best argument. Look, I wish Mark was right. We can make it all transparent, but I'd rather have this law than not. So it's kind of like his reporter story. Yeah, there's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
And welcome back to the show. Now, does that make you furious inside? That someone can be so arrogant, so blatant, so out there, and that you could discover that you were played for the fool, in which many of you were? I bet that's upsetting inside. Now, many people would like to play the blame game. Many people would like to say, hey, we don't need to talk about impeachment. it's only 2 years away before we have a new president anyways, Kari, this or that. But that's just kicking the can down the road, not dealing with the issues here today, and not wanting to acknowledge that many of you capitulated and are directly or indirectly a part of this problem. Many people decided to support the wrong people for Congress. I live here in Washington State. The district of Congress that I live in runs from what would be Linwood, Washington, just north of Seattle, what would be about 20 miles north of Seattle, to what would be all the way up to Canada, the islands, and out toward what would be the mountains a little ways. So it's a good size area. And I can tell you that we have a congressman here by the name of Rick Larson. I don't care if he's a Republican or Democrat or this or that. He happens to be a Democrat. But what my problem is this is a Congress member who has capitulated, supported, directly and indirectly, nearly that of the worst laws, economically and war speaking, of the past two administrations, George W. Bush and the current administration, Barack Hussein Obama. This is a guy who endorsed Obama. This is a guy who loved Obama. This is a guy who, went with him the whole time, and now he talks about holding the president accountable. But he doesn't do that. And when I asked him, well, how far will you go, Rick? When you signed on to House Resolution 105, House Concurrent Resolution 105, just before we leave it on recess in August, how far will you go if this president decides not to consult Congress for what would be regarding Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution regarding acquiring the Congress to consent war, which is what you have to do according to the law. So I asked him directly on his Twitter less than 30, 40 seconds after he posted that about holding the prez accountable. I said, well, will you support impeachment? And if you don't, then you are indirectly supporting the president. Well, Mr. Larson had no response for me, as you could imagine. But anyway, it is what it is. So before we move on too much onto articles or whatnot, we need to look at what would be this ex-Obama aide demolishes New York Times claim that Gruber's role was, quote, limited. And let's see a little bit more to the story so you get a full picture understanding of what's going on with Mr. Gruber, the Obama administration, government, the rule of law, and your futures, because you, Mr. and Mrs. America, deserve to know what's coming down the pipeline. And we'll catch you right back after this break.
This is taken care of by the president, engaging in politics 101. He's a smart guy. We use him. He helped us do a lot of really good things, but he said some stupid things. Instead of Steve pretending like he didn't even know who he was.
Look, I think that's exactly the point. Jonathan Gruber was, back in the day, in 2009, the guru on health care. As you said, he designed the Massachusetts plan for Romney. I think if you go back and look at the Washington Post or the New York Times or anything from that period, you will find Jonathan Gruber's name all over it, as both someone who's a leading expert on healthcare, quoted by everybody, as someone who the White House was using. I don't think we knew the dollar numbers that he was paid at the time, but he was certainly, I remember that when I was in the White House, he was certainly viewed as an important figure in helping to put Obamacare together. And so it's exactly what you said. The problem is not that Gruber helped them put Obamacare together, because he was the man. The problem is what he said in the last 2 weeks and how the White House has handled it.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming back to us now. Now we're going to move on with the articles. Republicans threaten to impeach Obama if he issues executive action on immigration. Well, he issued it, so now what will happen? Believe it when you see it. It is what it is. It's very unfortunate because we have a bunch of Republicans that are riding the wave of what would be this president to try to make themselves look bad. So we have basically a bunch of Republicans that's saying, no, sit back and allow Obama to do this. Then he can make us look better in the long run from his own bad doing. And this is horrible. They're letting this guy get away with this. It's almost like a police officer saying, let's let the guy go into the home and grab the TV so when he walks out, we can shoot him when he comes outside. I mean, that's almost like that. It's like a setup. It's like, wow. Instead of trying to stop the burglary or this or that, we say, no, we'll just let him get away with it so we can torture him afterward or something. No, that's insane. Anyways, so like I've been telling other people, including what would be newly re-elected state representatives in Washington State, I said, hey, unlike Jerry Cornfield's article from the Everett Herald newspaper, the GOP did not get their groove back. The only reason why the Republicans won is because people are so tired and furious with the Democrats. So that doesn't really mean that you got loved. You were the only other option on the table, so therefore they ran from Obama and naturally came into your arms. It doesn't necessarily mean they're really happy with the Republicans. And the American people, if they don't see a real result this time, we're going to see a major paradigm shift. More and more pan out and play out over what would be the preceding times ahead of us. I can assure you of that. So you better go after Obama, or you're going to look just as bad, if not worse, than him in the long run. Because someday your constituency is going to ask you, why didn't you support the impeachment of Obama? Why didn't you go public? Why didn't you risk your butt? And right now, something major is happening right now within both parties. Most of the Republicans are not happy with the Republican Party. Many of the Democrats are not happy with their party and their president either. So what does this mean? Many folks are beginning to separate themselves from the party. They're becoming more open-minded to potentially a third-party candidate, such as an independent, and people are beginning to look beyond party politics. So it's very interesting. Now, Olympia, Washington, is having a major gun rally because people are upset with recent legislation and things that have been taking place here in the great state of Washington. So December 13th, which is a Saturday at 11 a.m. on the Capitol grounds, that day there will be a huge gun rally. Now the night before, I'm actually having a patriotic little party myself and whatnot, which will be Friday night in the Capitol. It will be at the Hilton Hotel at 8:30 p.m. on Friday, what would be the 12th, as I mentioned, the day prior to the gun rally, and that will be at the Hilton Hotel at the bar, in which is referred to as Freedom and with a Nightcap. This is my personal party in which you, that's right, each and every one of you that's watching is invited. So come on down, have a drink, chat politics and economics with us, talk guns, talk about whatever is on your mind. We're there for the purpose of freedom and the circumstances that be. So I invite you. If you want to know the truth and you want to put in your 2 cents, learn a few things, teach a few things, come be part of the action and whatnot. And this is what we need, is gatherings and groups of people of like minds to get together. So knowing that there's going to be thousands of people down there that weekend, I figured I would incorporate the ability to utilize the fact that there's people down there and maybe have some extra time on their hands and would like something to do on a Friday evening. So I figured a nice upscale, well-lit, clean environment such as what would be the Hilton Hotel, the bar there would be a nice place to join, sit back and have a few glasses of wine and let's talk about what would be our nation and where we want to go for the future, and regarding where we want to go in the great state of Washington here, which is a wonderful place to live. Now, Black Friday is actually today. I have to record my show a couple days before the 1st in order to have it up. So with editing and all the stuff that comes through the process. So today was Black Friday, but because of this extremely horrible economy, there was hardly any shopping today. Many stores noticed that. So while a lot of people thought that they were going to sell out of everything, it was going to be like a genie in a lamp or something, it was just all going to work out, many malls across the nation, including one of the largest ones in Connecticut, stated that they did not see the turnout of what they are used to. And we've had a few years now of this economy, you know, technically ever since the end of Bush, that last, year and a half. And boy, oh boy, now it's just getting to the point to where, people can't even afford the shopping even for a holiday season now. And everybody, parents and grandparents, try to put away something for this time of year. When folks can't even put away something for this time of year for Black Friday sales, that shows the belt is getting tight. So, onward with the show. Controversial economist Gruber has earned millions from taxpayers at the federal state levels. Nancy Pelosi and Obama have tried to deny that he was even playing an important role in the Obamacare legislation. But with those videos that we just saw earlier, we know better than that, don't we? Russians recently disabled U.S. guided missile system, U.S. guided missile destroyer. In April of this year, the USS Donald Cook was disabled while on patrol in the Black Sea by an unarmed Russian bomber. They're just letting us know that they've got technologies and secrets and surprises too. Yeah, very interesting. U.S. child homelessness is at an all-time high right now. This is horrible. As we're discussing this at the holiday season and this time of year, In the United States, 1 child in every 30, or 2.5 million children, approximately, according to this number, was homeless in 2013, marking an all-time high according to a comprehensive report that blames the country's high poverty rate on lack of affordable housing, amongst other causes. We have a president that doesn't serve the interests. We have a government that doesn't serve the interests of the people, this and that. So, I mean, how can you create jobs? How can you create an economy? How can you have a society that works? How can anything work out when the government doesn't work? And when many of the people don't care to do what's right either. So it's a double whammy. Most of the people don't care what's going on, and the government reflects them, which is they don't care either. So I guess until the people's heart begins to really change and they care, most of your government won't care either. So if you're sitting there watching your family and parents and neighbors' businesses go down the drain, but you don't care, don't be surprised if your neighbors and friends and folks watch you go down the tubes and don't shed any tears for you either. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So anyway, Obama says that, quote, we're going to contribute $3 billion to the Green Climate Fund, unquote. Unemployed Americans increasingly abandoning job searching. That's right. Many Americans are just tired. They're tired of working to even find that job. It's so discouraging, and now they're just giving up, tossing in the towel. 39%, according to this poll, of young Americans don't even want to work anymore. 39%. That's 4 out of 10 people. That's scary. Where are we heading? Most college grads are forced to move back into their parents' and grandparents' home after finishing high school, or after finishing what would be college. That's not why they went into 50, 100 grand worth of debt to move back in with their parents and grandparents. Now that's depressing, and that's just asking for another overdose case or suicide or something. United Nations declares arms trade treaty to go into effect what would be December 24th, 2014. And that's a major reason why we're having the gun rally in Olympia, because of that. Now the question is, what is our state representatives here going to do or not do? And this is a thing. There's a state representative here I like. Her name is Elizabeth Scott. I supported her. I endorsed her campaign. I don't agree with a lot of her economic policies, but I like her as a human being in person because she goes out on a whim. She's willing to be the fringe person if she has to in order to stand for what she believes is principle. So, setting aside the variations and little variables of differences of what we agree, like, or disagree with one another, I try to look at the bigger picture. And she is someone who wants to do well, but now she's been reelected. How far will she fight for gun rights and against Obama now in the circumstances? So that's why I'm putting pressure on her and saying, hey, Elizabeth, what you did over the last 2 years was remarkable, but now the bar gets raised even more. So what you do or don't do will be a decisive factor come next re-election. And as I mentioned to her as well, and other folks, just like all the state representatives, every single, by the way, here over the next week, by the time 1 week into December has hit, every single sheriff, state representative, state senator, almost every single bank, financial institution, so on and so forth within my district, and folks all over the state of Washington are going to be receiving a letter and publication from me describing in detail what is to come and the circumstances. And there is something, by the way, I'm going to remind you once again, called the bank bail-in mechanism, which makes it to where, when it all comes into play, over the next, give or take, anywhere from 3 months to 2.5 years, I'm forecasting that the bank bail-in will happen, in which your 401ks, pension, personal retirements, savings, so on and so forth, the stock market, a lot of this is going to get sucked under, and the wealth is going to be taken away. And this is a very, very horrible thing. Obama to double U.S. troops in Iraq. Kissinger even warned of the West, quote, fatal mistake, unquote, that may lead to a new Cold War regarding Ukraine, United States, Russia circumstances, a very special relationship and whatnot between what would be our president and David Cameron, Prime Minister of what would be the UK as well, which is a very interesting variable to discuss and look into sometime as well, as he actually tucked in what would be Prime Minister feet into bed and whatnot, tucked him into bed on Air Force One. But anyway, so sticking to task and whatnot, we're at a very interesting point in the road when what we do or don't do is going to affect the future of humanity. This is a point now when we begin to see things materialize and even fall apart before our eyes at a very alarming rate. So I urge you, Mr. and Mrs. America, Mr. and Mrs. State, what would be folks in Washington State, and so on and so forth, wherever you're at, take the time to be educated. Read. Become aware of what's going on. Become part of the problem? No. Become part of the solution? Yes. That is what you need to contribute to, one way or another. We have to work through this. We have to help each other through this and help folks that have fallen off the bandwagon. So put the pressure on your state representatives, your local city council members, so on and so forth. Let them know that you have an expectation. They have a duty to fulfill, constitutional obligation. And if they don't fulfill that, then you are going to replace them sooner than later. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host once again, Kari Ilonummi, signing off with the final report, monthly report for what would be December 2014. Thank you so much, and we will see you in the new year. God bless you. See you in January of 2015.
Fires are still burning in Ferguson, Missouri, after unrest and anger left destruction in the streets. The violence comes after a grand jury declined to indict Officer Darren Wilson in the shooting death of Michael Brown. Crowds looted many businesses, some burned to the ground. Police made more than 29 arrests in what they call the worst night of violence since the August shooting.
Gunfire rang out in the streets. Mobs of people destroyed police cars and threw bricks at officers. And because of the gunshots in the air, the FAA rerouted planes. Michelle Miller is in Ferguson. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Nora. These are some of the businesses that received the brunt of that anger here in Ferguson. Little Caesars over here to my right, and this is a jewelry store. What's left of it completely burned out. All's quiet now, but a night that began with peaceful protests quickly spiraled out of control. On the streets of Ferguson, protests that have been largely peaceful over the last few months erupted after the grand jury's decision. Clouds of what appeared to be tear gas enveloped the streets. A CBS News cameraman took cover in a parking lot when gunshots rang out around him. Several businesses, including cars in this lot, fully engulfed in flames. Restaurants and stores looted, shop owners assessing the destruction.
It's got anger all over it, you know, showcases of folded down, glasses everywhere. It's not just to take the stuff, it's more to do damage.
West Florissant Avenue, where violent images shook the nation in August, was again the scene of turmoil.
It just spun out of control. What I've seen tonight is probably much worse than the worst night we ever had in August. And that's truly unfortunate.
Outside Ferguson Police Headquarters, anger boiled over. 2 police cars were set on fire as officers in riot gear and armored vehicles attempted to break up unruly crowds.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! You need to stop throwing objects at the police and disperse immediately.
Some hurled rocks, bricks, and bottles.
Stop it! Stop it!
Police returned fire with rubber bullets, stun guns, and smoke canisters. Less than 2 miles from Ferguson, several cars burned in front of Dellwood City Hall. And in nearby St. Louis, crowds blocked traffic on Interstate 44. Now, the Missouri National Guard, which was activated by Governor Jay Nixon last week through a state of emergency, seemed largely absent. We did not see them at the Ferguson police station and some of the other hot zones around the area, but by 2 a.m. they were present in full riot gear at the Ferguson Police Department over on West Florissant Avenue. Nora? Gail?
All right, Michelle, I'll take it.